Welcome to Book Banter with me, your host, Dianne Burkhart. I hope you will join me every Wednesday as we explore all things to do with, well, books. Let's get on with our show today. Hello, my happy people. Today is March 19th, 2025, and we have got a fantastic interview for you today. But then, when don't we? With all of these great authors, it's hard not to have a great episode. And today is going to be a very special one. We get to talk with a wonderful author who has a long career as an entertainment journalist, and the things that she has done is absolutely amazing. All of her years of experience as a writer definitely comes through in her latest book, which will be dropping here very shortly on April 8th. For once, we actually get to do a little pre-publication promotion. Ooh, that's hard to say. Try and do that 3 times fast. This is a book you're going to want to put on your to-be-read list and get your order in as soon as possible. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and bring forward our author interview today. Please welcome to Book Banter with Dianne Burkhart, Randee Dawn. Now, if you've listened to any of our other interviews, you know that the way that I like to start this is to just have my guest please introduce yourself and tell everyone who you are and what you do.
Well, hi there. My name is Randee Dawn. Thank you so much for having me on the program. I am a journalist and I am an author. The journalism side of me is that I write about entertainment journalism and have done it for a bunch of decades. I write about movies and TV and all sorts of other areas like that for outlets like the Los Angeles Times, Variety, the Today Show's website, places like that. But my real true heart lies in my fiction writing. And I am the author of a bunch of short stories and a novel called Tune In Tomorrow, which came out in 2022 and was reissued in 2024. It's a funny pop culture fantasy. And then I also have 3 books coming out in 2025, which is kind of crazy. The first one is called The Only Song Worth Singing. It is also a fantasy. It's a rock and roll meets Irish Fae fantasy. Later in the year, in August, I have Leave No Trace, which is another fantasy mixed with musicians and Celtic lore and folklore. And then finally, sometime in the fall, will be a follow-up to the Tune In Tomorrow book. So everything just kind of came together at once. So yeah, the fiction that I write tends to be science fiction, fantasy, some horror, because there's all sorts of crossovers. And then I also have written, I co-authored, I should say, the Law and Order SVU Unofficial Companion with fellow author Susan Green, who is no longer with us. And that was pretty exciting too. So I have some nonfiction and I have some fiction. I am based in Brooklyn and I am married to a lovely man who is a teacher. And he is perfectly happy with being Mr. Randee Dawn, assuming that I ever hit it big. So that's my elevator pitch about me.
You know, one of the things that I was really interested about whenever you sent the information about being on the podcast was that you started out as an entertainment reporter.
Mm-hmm.
And so did I. That's what I did right out of journalism school.
Yeah, well, you may have noticed that when you're in college, it's kind of easy to slide into entertainment journalism only because, like, I started out doing music journalism and they would just send me all sorts of free swag and or send me to concerts because that's their key audience. That's the people they want. Like indie bands really want college students to become fans. So they would send albums or cassette tapes or, CDs, and they would get you free into shows and you'd be on the guest lists. And so it was kind of an open door in a lot of ways. And if you did that, you could get more clips than you might get if you were trying to do more serious news.
Mm-hmm. So now, how did you go from your college level writing into writing pieces like for Variety and E! Online?
Yeah, so it kind of all feeds on itself. Everybody has their own story, but for me, it was very much like, I'm on this rung, I'd like to go to this rung, let's go try and get to that rung, just moving it up very slowly. Yeah. So I wrote for free. I wrote for a lot of places that paid like $10 for a review for a long time. But you amass those clips, and then you can go to someone who's a little bit higher up on the food chain and say, I have these clips. Here are some ideas. Can I write for you? So I just sort of worked in that direction. I lived in Boston. I was going to school in Boston when I was first getting started. And the local indie paper was called the Boston Phoenix. And it was kind of the village voice of Boston. It was really well-established, counterculture, alternative. And I went to a free concert for a band that I liked, and I ran into one of the editors there, and I said, "Hey, I'd like to write for you, and I have clips." And he's like, "Okay, let's talk." So like, it was just kind of feeding on that sort of stuff. And then I would just reach out to magazines that I wanted to write for and say, "Here are some ideas. What do you think?" I wrote for Alternative Press magazine. That was kind of the next one, the next rung on the ladder. And they gave me a lot of consistent work for a very long time, but it also took me a year of pitching to actually get my first piece in there. But once that happened, it kind of clicked. Making the leap to something bigger like the trade publication, The Hollywood Reporter, and then later on Variety, that was more just luck, because I had lived in Boston for a bunch of years and I was temping. I graduated college, could not get a journalism job, was temping, but also freelancing. And I realized if I was in New York, I could do this exact same thing, but I'd have more contacts and I'd get more assignments, because this is not quite pre-internet, but certainly early internet days. And you were taken much more seriously if you were in Los Angeles or New York. Working remotely just wasn't considered like, oh, well, she must not be very good if she can't even live in New York and do this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Or be very serious about it.
Right, exactly. Oh, yeah, which that sounds so alien. And of course, it was very snooty at the time. But I did notice that once I moved to New York, I got more assignments. So there you go. But I moved to New York and I was still temping and I was still freelancing. And I'm like, maybe this is going to be my life. But I became a huge fan of Law and Order around that time. All the reruns were on A&E at like 11 o'clock at night. And I just became a huge fan. And I'm like, oh, I really want to start writing about this. And I'm not being able to write as much about music anymore, because even though I love music, I don't think it resonates in the same way once you're in your late 20s in the way that it did when you're a teen or your early 20s. Mm-hmm. And I really fell in love with Law and Order. I'm like, maybe I should go to law school. I can't afford law school. I can't afford to take off all the time that I would need to go to law school, but I could get a paralegal degree. And so NYU had a continuing education program, and I signed up for that for the paralegal degree, because I actually did some temp work in doing paralegal type stuff. I actually really liked it. So I thought, well, maybe this is the direction I'm supposed to head in. So I became friends with a woman in my paralegal classes, and we became study buddies. And I let her know about my freelance, and she said, "Oh, well, my brother-in-law is the bureau chief of the Hollywood Reporter. You should send him clips. I'll help." And literally, that's just how it went. So
wow.
You just never know. It's one of these things where you have to put yourself out in the world. You have to keep trying new avenues, even avenues you don't expect are going to lead in the direction you want to lead in. Mm-hmm. And I'm not too much into the sort of, "Ooh, fate drove you to this direction." Sometimes I sort of think, I made a genuine effort at being a journalist and it wasn't panning out. So I tried something else, and the universe kind of said to me, no, we're going to steer you back in the lane. We're going to give you this Hollywood Reporter thing. And then right after I got my paralegal certificate, I ended up getting hired at a magazine, not at the Hollywood Reporter, that came later, but I got hired at a magazine. So it's kind of like, all right, I will listen to the universe. I will leave the paralegal behind me and continue. I sort of feel like anybody who's despairing about where they're going to go next, or this isn't working out for me, this isn't panning out for me, just keep trying new things. Find the next thing that you might really be into. And then you may end up doing that. That's great. But you also may end up getting led back to where you wanted to be in the first place. And Law and Order just really became this outlet for me, because I was passionate about it in the way that I had been passionate about music. And again, not that I'm not still passionate about music, just, in that sort of early falling in love, heart beating, kind of like, oh, I'm so fascinated with this. I'll do anything to write about it. And that gave me a lot of in with the Hollywood Reporter. So I wrote a lot of articles about them. And that's how I got in contact with Susan Green, who had done the Law and Order Unofficial Companion. And we interviewed. And when she was ready to do the Law and Order Unofficial Companion, her co-author for the first book wasn't interested in continuing. And she remembered me and reached out and said, "Hey, you want to do this book together?" So it's just kind of a lot of synchronicity and things coming together. In recent years, I've come up with this idea that, like, I think some people think I want to do this for my job. I want to be a doctor. I'm going to be a surgeon. I'm going to be that thing. That is the center of my bullseye. Mm-hmm. And if I don't get that, things have not worked. But the way I look at it now is, if you hit the target, if you hit anywhere near the bullseye, you're doing really good. You're probably not going to hit that bullseye. Most people do not hit the bullseye. But if you get into the reds or the yellows or the whites, that's pretty good. And I'm actually very happy with where my darts landed.
Now, how was it for you to go from being a solo author to working with a writing partner? Was that a hard transition or really easy?
It's funny. The nature of the book lent itself to shared work.
Hmm.
We sat down and the book was actually, it's unofficial, but we got our foreword written by Dick Wolf, who created the franchise. So we had a lot of access. He gave us access to the set. He basically called the people on the set and said, let them go anywhere, let them talk to anybody you want. So we had this kind of, carte blanche. And she had done the previous book, so she already knew like what elements were going to go into it. So I was willing to be guided by her, but she said, well, what things do you want to do and what things do I want to do? And we kind of split it down the middle. We were on the set together and gathering information, but for the most part, she did like the whole history of the show and and compiling that aspect of things, whereas I was really excited to do all the interviews with all the actors, which to me feels like the real plum stuff. I'm like, if you don't want to, I'll be happy to do that. So I did all the interviews, and then it covers the first 12 seasons of the show. And at the time, there were maybe like 200 episodes to watch, and that was going to be a big ask. And we were going to do an episode guide at the end of the book. So we said, all right, look, I'll watch 100 and you watch 100, and then we'll compile our notes and come up with some sort of format that will work. So basically, we were able to, as they say, split the baby in ways that maybe you couldn't do with a different type of book. In this case, it wasn't difficult. And then she read my stuff and I read her stuff, and we made little tiny changes. And we worked 100% on Google Docs. It was all like, because she was living in Vermont and I was living down in New York. So we weren't even in the same state. And that worked out really well. I don't believe that I've done any other shared books or anything with anybody else. It's not that I couldn't, but I always am a little amazed at people who can write an entire, say, novel with another person.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, how does that work? My process for writing is just specific enough that I'd be interested to see how it would work, but I don't know if I'm that interested.
I've actually interviewed a couple of different writing teams the last couple of seasons. And I'm always telling them, it's like, for me, the idea of writing with another person just brings that fear of the college group project. That
Yeah.
I am always afraid that if I get into something with somebody else, I'm going to still end up doing everything and they're going to get half the credit.
Yep. You just made me flash back to actually, I think I was in 9th grade. We had an English assignment and they picked like a famous sentence from multiple books, and you could pick whichever famous sentence you wanted to use as your prompt. You had to write a short story with a group with this as your first sentence. And I sat down with the group and I think I just said to them, look, I like to write fiction. I'll do this. Just give this to me and we can just pretend we all did it. And they were like, sure. So that is the other group writing project I have done, not to have a group. But it was a fun exercise. I did like writing fiction. I do like writing fiction. And it was fun to just sit down and use the prompt. I think it was a Ray Bradbury prompt altogether. So
Since you did start out in journalism, do you think it made it an easy transition to do short fiction?
technically, I actually started out with fiction because I was writing fiction when I was about my stuffed animals when I was like 7, 8 years old. So technically, I was doing fiction first. There are people who will say that journalism doesn't help you one way or the other with fiction, but I disagree with that because journalism helped me learn to be edited. It helped me learn the value of what edits can be. I was very precious about my fiction for a long time and just didn't show it around to anybody. Or if I showed it around to anybody, I sort of felt like I had to have this sort of like, yeah, prove to me there's something wrong with it. It's clearly perfect. That is not the way to go into this.
Yeah.
But getting edited on a nonfiction story that I had written, an interview, a feature piece, whatever, I didn't have such a personal investment in that story. I wanted it to be good, of course, but I don't think my ego was so tied up into it. And so I would get feedback from editors about how to fix this or how to change this or why this wasn't working. And I could absorb that. And then when I finally got grown up or mature enough to realize that, oh, yes, people can comment on your fiction and have possibly negative things to say, possibly just constructive criticism things to say about it, I was able to move my ego at least off to the side rather than even if I couldn't take it all the way out. It also helped me in terms of the process of editing, what you can cut out, what you don't need to say. You don't the repetition that we often do. I've written sentences where it's like, she waved with her hand. Well, it's like, what else is she got to wave with? Take that out. So you learn to be a better writer because you're paying attention. I was an editor also for a while. And as an editor, I'm a very good writer. Like editing is not my forte, but that's what they hire you for at magazines. They don't usually hire a lot of writers. They hire editors. So I learned how to edit other people and then how to apply that onto my own writing, which helped a lot. And we can decide for ourselves whether this is a good idea or not. But I have spent a lot of time pitching editors, following up with editors. This is nonfiction, checking in on stories, kind of trying to fine tune stories over the years. And when I went into the publishing process, I've tried to treat everybody the same way, in that same professional way. And publishing doesn't always lend itself to that. I think there's a certain feeling like, oh, these agents are untouchable and how dare you follow up with them? But I'm just going to follow up with you. I want to know that you can be a business person. And if I send you, whether it's a publishing house or an agent, and if I send you something and you don't get back to me, that is unprofessional.
Yeah.
If you don't get back to me in a reasonable period of time, that's unprofessional. And there's nothing wrong with me following up and just saying, hey, did this arrive? Because we all know we have spam folders.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody ever yelled at me about it, but I think it's important for writers to try and assert that this is, again, move the ego off to the side a little bit and think about it as this is now a business. You finished writing the thing. Take that to the side. Now treat it as a business. How do you want to work with somebody in the future? And if this person can't get back to you in time, or it just sends you a form email, think of that as that's the business person you're going to work with in the future. And maybe you don't want to work with them. So journalism and doing that for a lot of years made me confident in like, this is how to deal with this on a professional basis.
For me, the experience that I got with journalism is it taught me how to write tight, how to give a good, entertaining sentence or paragraph with minimal words without going too far.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that that is what a lot of people say. And I totally believe that for them. My journalism that I always wanted to do kind of stems out of what was called new journalism. It came out, that started like in the 60s and 70s with authors and writers like Gay Talese, who were writing these very long pieces, thousands of words, for Vanity Fair, for example, or GQ or Rolling Stone. And the few times I got a chance to really write long pieces, like I got a 4,000, 5,000 word assignment from Alternative Press to go interview a band or interview a singer, it was exciting because you knew with that much space you're getting a cover, but also you'd have one-on-one time for an extended period with whoever the musician was. And I did that a couple of times. And in writing that article, I didn't fictionalize things, but I was able to take real life and sort of put it into a narrative framework to find the metaphors, to sort of do a little bit of light pop psychology on the person that I was interviewing, like why they do the things they do. And that was the most interesting to me. So, yes, writing news pieces, writing, short form journalism does teach you how to write tight. For me, I like writing just a little bit more loosey-goosey in terms of telling a story with a subject. And those were always my favorite pieces. Unfortunately, the internet then took over and everything has to be a listicle or 500 words. And there's very few places where you can do long-form journalism anymore, which is a shame. Long-form profile journalism, I should say. And that's really what I loved doing best about journalism.
That was the one thing that always surprised me. It's like here you have the internet where basically you could write a piece as long as you want and people can just keep scrolling. And they want stuff that's like 2 paragraphs long. I think that just speaks more to not necessarily the medium, but more the people enjoying the medium, their attention span has dropped. That they want tons of short pieces instead of one long one.
Right. And that is accurate. And I don't think that that's not true. I think our attention spans have been challenged since the MTV era. Because I remember watching videos with my mom sometimes, like, Mom, you got to see this video. It's great. And she's like, I can't keep up. The cuts are too fast. Like, but I grew up being like, that was my speed. I think that part of the problem is that the internet got co-opted by advertising. Yeah. And yes, you can have a long piece, but people don't like getting barraged with videos that autoplay or ads that flash at you or all these things. And so if they can just get in and out on the article to just get the information they need, that seems to be the preference.
Now, at what point did you decide that you wanted to move from doing short anthology pieces and journalism and actually sit down to write a book?
So that is a natural question to ask, and I will now flash you all the way back to when I was in middle school and I was writing my first novel. So technically, we moved from the stuffed animals to my first novel, and I was writing it in my classes primarily because it looked like you were taking notes,
Yeah.
and I was a pretty good student already. So I'm sure the teachers were like, wow, she's taking a lot of notes. But I was handwriting my novels when I was in class. And then I would take the chapters and I would let my friends borrow them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like they were getting this serial book that I was handing out chapter by chapter. Or I would go home at night and they would let me read a chapter to them on the phone.
Oh, wow.
Sounds astounding. Like I can't imagine why they would do that. But so yeah, I was writing novels also before I started with journalism. Journalism came out of this conversation. I thought I wanted to be a veterinarian because I loved animals. And I took an animal husbandry class in 7th grade, and we had to give the rabbits that we cared for vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
And I freaked out because I'm like, I can't put a needle into something. So I had a very early midlife crisis in 7th grade going, now I don't know what to do with my life. My mom said to me, well, what do you like to do? I like to write. Okay, great. You could be a journalist. What's a journalist? So that's literally how that conversation took place. And it became obvious to me early on that writing books, writing stories, writing novels was not going to be super remunerative.
Mm-hmm.
I just knew that it was going to take a long time. It was not something that I really thought I could turn around into being a career, but I could write and I could get paid if I did journalism. Mm-hmm. So journalism was kind of always this means to an end. I enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it. I am not sorry that was the career I chose for myself. And when I say I mean, I am still doing it. But it was never meant to be the end of things. The idea was to either become so famous that I would write books and people would buy books and then I could just get paid for writing my books. Or in the course of doing journalism, I would write a book and it would sell and I could just do books. Very few fiction writers, as I'm sure you know, can make a living off of fiction. So it's actually a good thing to have a backup career, which had its benefits. And I'm not sorry at all, but the fiction writing happened before the journalism even happened. And what's funny is one of the books that I was writing when I was in middle school, handing out chapter to chapter, is one of the books that's coming out this year. It's changed a lot, but the core essence of it, like the location and one of the characters is the same. Almost everything else has changed, and it's become a fantasy novel. It wasn't necessarily a fantasy novel before, but that's a real long lead time for a book to come out. So yeah, for me, the goal was getting the books out and finding ways to write more books.
So what was the first book that you wrote in middle school? What was it about?
The book that's coming out later this year is called Leave No Trace. And that's been the title for quite a while, but not since the beginning. Anyway, I had been inspired by a movie that I watched. There was a movie that I saw when I was probably a little too young to see it because we had a very early version of cable, and it was called Smash Palace. It's by Roger Donaldson. And it's really about a dissolution of a marriage between these two people. It takes place in New Zealand. And towards the end of the picture, the father kidnaps their young daughter and takes her into they call it the bush, but since it's New Zealand, it's actually very lush and green. And his whole idea is that they're just going to live there. They're going to live in the woods and she'll never see her mom again and he'll have stolen this custody. And it doesn't really last very long. That's a very short portion of the movie. The little girl gets a cold or something and he has to go out to the drugstore to get medicine and then they are found. But that element stuck with me. And I was like, well, what if they didn't leave? What if they never left? And he raises his daughter in the woods. What would that be like? And so that was kind of the what if of that dovetailed with this idea because I was still crazy about music and there was another band I was thinking about. I was like, well, what if that was happening at the same time that a band decides to go on vacation in the woods? And they all meet up and then tragedy happens and then it snows and she has to lead them out of the woods. And that's the big drama. So that was really the core of the initial book. And we still have in the current book this young woman who was raised by her father in the woods, since she was about 8 or something. It's not Nell, it's not that movie where she can't even speak. So, she's in the woods and she's grown up in the woods and her dad's kind of one of these crazy people who thinks that everybody else in the rest of the world is sick. But they make a living by providing guidance to hunters who want to come and shoot a deer or something like that. So that's how they can afford to stay in the woods. And there is still a couple of musicians who come to the woods.
One of the things that I really like about some of your work is that you still have this theme of music going through everything.
Yeah. Music is to me the best example of real magic that we have in the world. There are people who can pull rabbits out of a hat and that kind of thing. The sleight of hand. I do like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I write about fantasy. I like fantasy. I would love to believe that magic really exists. But I think that music is the thing that when you put enough people in a room or people who are passionate about sounds, about a song, you get an energy that cannot really be duplicated almost anywhere else. Whether or not you're a Taylor Swift fan, and I like her stuff. I have nothing, for or against her. I think some of her stuff is terrific. I'm not a Swiftie necessarily, but when I watched her Eras tour, the movie version of it, I wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that she can do on stage and the energy in that room, I'm just like, this is actually like real live magic.
Mm-hmm.
And just the way that music has inspired me in the past and the way I feel about going to concerts and the fact that I can't do it. I can play the piano, but I'm not a musician. I'm just fascinated by that. So for me, that's something that I can get really passionate about. And I love putting it into stories. I love people who are very passionate in stories. I love characters who are passionate about something. And I like talking about music and musicians. And I love interviewing musicians more than anybody else. Actors are fine, but musicians are often creating their own stuff, performing their own stuff. They have to live that in a lot of ways that other performers or creators don't.
Yeah.
And that to me is just so magical and amazing. And yeah, so that's in both. The only song worth singing is the book that's coming out in April. And that is full of music and a band on tour and everything. But yes, there is music elements in Leave No Trace. And there's not a whole lot in Tune In Tomorrow, but that's more of a TV-based thing anyway.
And that one was the first book that you actually published.
Correct.
How long did it take for you to actually get that one from writing the end to actually getting a copy in your hand?
Well, the nice thing about Tune In Tomorrow was that I wrote it after I had sort of set up all the dominoes in a way. I already had an agent.
Mm-hmm.
I had already sent her 2 different books, and they were the 2 of the books that are being published later this year. The only song worth singing got me the agent, but didn't get a publishing deal. Leave No Trace almost got a publishing deal, and it didn't happen. And she looked at me and she said, maybe you should try something a little different for the next book, because what you've done before is good, and it just hasn't landed. And I was thinking about what I could do that's different. I still wanted to write fantasy. I still wanted to write within the genre, speculative fiction genre. At that time, I had been going to conventions, and I met up with a woman who would show up at these conventions, and she works at a company called Choice of Games, which is an online sort of text-based choose your own adventure kind of thing. And they're great. You can go and check those out. And she said, we're always looking for new ideas. And she often talks to authors because they'll come up with these ideas. And I came up with this idea. I was like, I had worked at a soap opera magazine. What if we did sort of like a backstage All About Eve kind of situation at a soap opera magazine? That wackiness will ensue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I outlined this concept, and she said, yeah, that'd be great. Let's turn that into one of our games. But then as the writer, you then have to go and do all this. It's not quite coding like JavaScript, but because there's so many variables, like if your character does this, then this is how to change that character. And it kind of hurt my head and broke my brain. And it wasn't any fun after a while doing that part of things. And I said to her, I think this might not be for me, but this is still my story, right? And she's like, yeah, you didn't sign anything with us yet, so go right ahead. So I took that story, which was now outlined, and I started writing it in 2017. And the draft came pretty fast because I already had the outline. I was able to do a lot with it along the way. I showed it around, and I sent it out to my agent, and she liked it. And it just kind of like everything sort of moved in the direction that it was supposed to move in. It still took till 2022 to come out, but let's also remember there was a pandemic in the middle of that.
Yeah.
I literally got the call from my agent about the fact that Solaris wanted to acquire the book on March 13th, 2020, which was the same day New York shut down.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And then, of course, the publisher is based in Oxford, England. England was a little bit further behind us in terms of the shutting down part of things, but then they had to shut down also. So everything was remote. Everything moved even more slowly than the business often goes. And we didn't sign a contract till like the following July, not July of 2020, July of 2021. And then things moved very quickly. The edits went very fast. I didn't have to do too many changes. It wasn't about a soap opera. It became about a reality TV show. And it all moved fairly quickly after that. But in general, I think if you have all the dominoes sort of set up already, it's not unusual to be able to go 3-5 years between writing the first thing and having it come out, assuming that you get the deal.
Oh, yeah. Some of the authors that I've spoken to, it's even longer than that.
Oh, sure. Even if you have the agent, there's no guarantee. I wrote another book during the pandemic before I knew what was happening with Tune In Tomorrow. And I wrote this other book and I've had it sitting around, but because everything got very busy with Tune In Tomorrow and then with these new books, but it's now, I've given it to my agent and she is now shopping it around. We'll see how that goes. But again, if you look back and say, yes, I did write it first in 2020 and it wouldn't be, even if they bought it tomorrow, it wouldn't be out till 2027 probably. That doesn't mean it's quite 7 years between.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea is just, you got to keep writing, you got to keep writing, you got to keep writing.
Well, and I love the premise of Tune In Tomorrow. It's so original.
Thank you. I don't think I did my little elevator pitch on it. You want me to do that real quick?
Yeah.
So Tune In Tomorrow is about a reality TV show run by mythical creatures for mythical creatures, but starring humans. It's meant to be silly. It's meant to be very backstagey, how the sauce gets made. I was able to use a lot of my background from when I worked at the soap opera magazine in there. You know, I will neither confirm nor deny that any of these characters are inspired by actual soap opera actors. But it was a lot of fun to put together. And it was the first time I was really actively writing funny fiction. I hadn't tried funny fiction before. Mm-hmm. And it was very freeing in a lot of ways. I was like, how can we turn that dial up to 11? How much wackier can we make things before they break? So that was a lot of fun to do. And I have 2 more books that will be coming out from that universe. It's a standalone book, but there'll be 2 more books coming out in that universe, one of which is coming out in the fall. Whereas The Only Song Worth Singing and Leave No Trace they're not meant to be funny. Hopefully they're not funny because they're not meant to be. They're supposed to be serious books. But it's been a lot of fun putting that together, seeing how silly I can make things. I'm a fan of the lowest form of humor, which is puns. Mm-hmm. So there's puns, there's plays on names and all sorts of things in there. So yeah.
So now The Only Song Worth Singing, that's the next one that's being published, right?
Correct. That'll be out on April 8th.
And what's that one about?
So in The Only Song Worth Singing, it's a music band of best friends, 3 best friends who've known each other since they were kids. They're from Dublin, Ireland. They're in America for the first time in the 1990s, doing their first tour. And they are pursued and their lives are turned upside down by actual Irish fae, these fairy creatures. And the fairy creatures very much have an agenda of their own and know things that the band members don't know and are not the nice little cute little fairy creatures with wings or anything you might expect. It's a contemporary urban fantasy, so they kind of look like they're human, but they have powers. So at its core, it's really about their friendship and how that is the most important thing in their lives. But all 3 of them have to sort of undergo serious changes once they are bedeviled by these various fae. And at the same time, they're still performing shows and they're traveling on the bus. So again, there's a lot of backstage how the sausage gets made in that one too.
Now I think would be a really good time to do our 5 quick questions that never turn out to be quick, but I'm just too stubborn to give up the bit.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I am ready.
Now I know that you are an animal lover. So question 1, what is your favorite animal?
Oh, anybody who looks at any pictures of me in an official capacity will know it is a fox.
I love all the photos of you with foxes because there's several different ones.
Yes. When I got my author photos taken, I had them taken at the Judith A. Bassett Canid Conservation Center. I always get a little bit of those words messed up, but they are a rescue center for canids outside of San Diego. And it's a terrific organization. They have some coyotes and wolves and foxes and singing dogs of Tibet. Apparently that's a thing. And the foxes are generally semi-domesticated. There was a whole domesticated fox program in Russia. It has been going on for over 50 years. And the foxes, eventually they can't keep all the foxes. So they sort of farm them out, as it were, to rescue organizations. And some of them live at JBEC. And I learned that I could go and I could not only hang out with a fox, but that you could have a photographer come in and get your picture taken with a fox. I'm like, let's put 2 things together. So that's how that worked out.
Well, plus it's good publicity for the rescue center.
Precisely. And that gives me an opportunity to tell people about the center. And there's actually a link to it on my bio page on my website. Yeah, it's funny. I think I've always liked foxes, but I got more into them in recent years. They're like cat dogs, they're sort of the best of both. And I just love looking at them. I think they're very pretty. I like how they behave. If you ever watch a fox hunting in the snow.
Yes.
And he just dives into the snow with a little butt in the air and everything. All dignity is gone. But they are pretty amazing. They can do all sorts of incredible things. And yes, I know there are people who do not like them and find them to be pests, but the more I pay attention, I feel like we are watching with foxes the next step in dog evolution, because they are coming closer and closer to our hearth, and we are starting to feed them from our gardens. And we are sort of domesticating them slowly ourselves without an official program. So it'll be interesting if you come back in another 100 years or 200 years, if foxes will be another dog in our arsenal.
Question 2. Since you are such an animal lover, do you have any pets in your home?
Currently, literally, we actually do have one pet in our home, which is kind of a surprise. A half kitten, half cat walked up to me just 2 or 3 days ago as I was shaking out something on my front porch. And we have a bunch of feral cats in this neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood in Brooklyn. And so we're used to seeing feral cats hanging around, but they don't approach you. They see you. They're gone. This one comes right up to me and just sort of looks at me. And I'm like, do you want to be picked up? I'm like, I'm going to lean over to pick up this cat and she's going to be gone. No. She totally let me pick her up. She's a love bug. We currently have this not feral, but young cat on their way to being feral in our house. And we're going to be rehoming her. I have to take her to the vet. I can't have a cat because I'm allergic, which is part of the reason you might hear me being a little bit stuffed up. But we have some friends who are looking for another cat, and I'm just going to take her to the vet and make sure she's okay. And, that she's not microchipped or anything, which seems unlikely. So currently, yes, we have a pet in our home. We did have a Westie until September of this year. Birdie was a lovely little adorable Westie. Think of the dog on the Caesar dog food container.
Yeah, they're adorable.
Such a sweet. I mean, everybody loved Birdie. She had the best personality and she was very sweet, and she was a rescue. I always recommend people get a rescue animal, and she was a rescue, and she just got very old. She was 14 and kind of everything was falling apart, and they had to make the decision, and it was very tough. But somebody once said that a pet is a slow motion tragedy. It's always there. If everything goes well, they're not going to outlive you. Mm-hmm. So you know what you're getting into when you bring an animal into the house, but it's always pretty hard when you have to let go.
Yes, definitely. Now, question 3. I know that you love to travel. What is your favorite travel destination, either domestic or foreign?
So I will tell you the place that I've been to that I loved the most, as opposed to the place that I'm more practically able to get to more frequently, if that makes any sense. About 15 years ago, I went to Australia and New Zealand for the first time. It was sort of part of this Qantas package deal. I always wanted to go to Australia. I was a big Australia fan ever since, I was like a little kid, and I always wanted to go. But I wasn't with anybody at the time, and I'm like, life is moving on. Take yourself. Go take yourself to Australia. So I went on a Qantas tour to Australia, and New Zealand was part of the package. And it's not that I had anything against New Zealand. I was totally on board with New Zealand, but it was New Zealand that I really fell in love with.
Oh, yeah.
There's a town on the South Island called Queenstown. I didn't know this until I was there, but I apparently really love a town that is like surrounded by mountains, but has a big lake and just has a sort of semi-quaintness to it. Mm-hmm. It's not far from where they filmed all the Hobbit films. So there's actually like tours you can go into the hills and see where they filmed the Hobbit films. But that wasn't my impetus. It was just part of the trip. And when I was there, I was like, I could see myself here. I really just loved that town. All of New Zealand was fabulous. So I would say New Zealand is absolutely my favorite place. My husband and I are planning to go, him for the first time and me for the second time. We're going to go back down to that part of the world, hopefully next year.
Have you been to the North Island?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The tour was like, I think it was 9 days in New Zealand and 12 days in Australia. So we started in Auckland and went to like Rotorua and saw the sulfur.
I was going to ask if you got to Rotorua.
Oh, yeah. And we went to Christchurch and, Queenstown and all the way down to the Franz Josef Glacier and everything. So it was terrific. I mean, it covered like all these different places and I loved it. And then from there, we ended up flying to Australia, and then you do that part of the trip.
Question 4. Whenever you have something like you get a notice that another one of your books is going to be published, do you celebrate? And if so, how do you do it?
I certainly celebrate within my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly celebrate with my husband. We might go to a nice dinner or that kind of thing. It's such a slow moving process. I think the way that it's portrayed in movies and TV is such a lie because it's sort of like, I wrote a book and the next day I've got a deal. This is such a slow moving process that it's not that it's not worth celebrating, but it's not a surprise so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to sort of decide, well, what are the aspects of this? Do I want to celebrate signing the contract? Do I want to celebrate the edits are all in and there's nothing more I can do? Do I want to celebrate the book is actually physically in my hand?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of opportunities to celebrate. And since Tune In Tomorrow was really my first novel that I got to make that decision on, clearly we went out to a nice dinner. We did what we could. Of course, we signed the deal. It was still COVID blackout, so we kind of had to do the dinner in the house. But what I did was I had this Johnny Walker Blue bottle that I had saved for many years and I hadn't opened. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to open this when my first book is published. So we cracked open the Johnny Walker Blue, only to find out it was corked. And there was a certain amount of finagling around the cork to actually get to the drink. But so that was a big celebration that we did. And I do not know what it will feel like when the next book comes out and what I plan to do with it. But it's April. You never know. I think we'll do something really cool. I just don't know what it is. Having a book party is something I might try and do as well. I go to a lot of conventions and having a party at the convention with the people who are likely to read the book is something that would be a great celebration for me.
Now, your last question.
Okay.
Whenever you want to sit down and read a book to relax, who is your go-to author?
You know, I have authors that I am very fond of and that I really like, and I love reading their stuff. I don't necessarily sit down with a book because of the author. It's more about what the subject is or it's something that I need to read for various reasons. My 2 favorite authors that always please me, that always provide me a story that I'm going to love are Jonathan Carroll, who is an American author, but he's been living in Vienna for many, many years. And he writes somewhere between fantasy and magical realism. He has a lot of talking dogs, for example. Mm-hmm. But he writes with a clarity and a beauty where you'll read a sentence and it just blows you away. Because at least for me, he's written sentences where I actually looked around the room and I'm just like, did you see this? Like, this is what's happening with me right now. How can he be doing this? It just speaks directly to my heart in a lot of ways. And he's not a flowery sort of writer, but he is also a very romantic writer at the same time. He loves people in love. He just loves interesting characters. And another author who I think I've read most everything of, but is a go-to if I just want to grab a book I've already read before, is Stephen King.
Yeah.
His short stories, his especially his early books. That is always a comfort read. Like I could pick up The Stand at any time and just start reading it again. His short stories are definitely influential for me.
Have you ever read, what's it called? Like The Eye of the Dragon, I think, is a fantasy book.
I did. I liked it. I was sorry there wasn't a follow-up.
Yeah, I really liked that one. I loved things like Misery and Carrie and all those kinds of things, but for some reason I really liked that. It was, such a different take on his worlds that he creates.
Yes.
The one thing that got me, I swear it was like 2 full pages of him describing somebody hiding behind a painting, looking through a peephole, watching the king sitting on his throne, picking his nose.
I remember that actually. Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I got to skip ahead because this is too well described. That's
yeah. I mean, I'll read whatever Stephen King puts out. I read his forewords, his afterwards, all the extra stuff that he puts into books too. I love that kind of thing. I love getting into his head. In more recent years, I don't think I've loved his books quite as much, but his early stuff, especially, and his short stories are really kind of, that's my happy place.
Yeah. So now let's remind everybody who you are and where they can find your work.
So my name is Randee Dawn, and I am a speculative fiction writer who writes mostly fantasy, but I have done science fiction, and I do some horror sometimes. But I'm also a journalist, and I write for Variety and the LA Times and a bunch of other places. And you can find me at randeedawn.com. Randee is spelled with 2 E's, so it's Randee Dawn, DAWN.com.
And we are going to have links to your website and your book and the wildlife rescue so that people can find that information too.
Hurrah. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you so much for having me on.
This has been so much fun. Thank you for being here.
It was great. You were terrific.
So there you have it, folks. My interview with the incredible Randee Dawn. Be sure to go check out all of her social media and get your order in now before her book drops on April 8th. It's available at several places, including IndieBound, Doylestown Bookstore, Barnes & Noble, and of course, Amazon. Now, next week, we have our last Lovefest author for this season. This has been such a great run. I have loved all of these authors. It has been absolutely a wonderful 2-month opening to season 4 of Book Banter with Dianne Burkhart, and I cannot thank all of these authors enough. It's been absolutely wonderful. And next week, we get to talk to none other than Doug Williams, and we'll be discussing his FBI thriller, Failure Point. This novel is an irresistible espionage thriller where nothing is as it seems, from white-knuckled spycraft to shattering domestic fallout, and of course, a love story that flows through the whole book. Doug Williams really delivers a novel that works on all levels. So be sure to come back next week and go check out all of Randee Dawn's social media. She's got so much fascinating information, and you will love the pictures of her at the Judith A. Bassett Canon Education and Conservation Center. The work that they do there is absolutely amazing, and the foxes are gorgeous. If you care about animal education and conservation, be sure to go check them out as well. You will find their link in the description of today's podcast, along with all of Randee Dawn's information. But I think that is enough for today. I've got so much to do. I'm getting started already on putting together this year's year-end book buying guide that we will have for the holiday shopping season for season 4. It will have every author from this year, and it is going to be so much fun to put together. We're going to try and do our best to get back to the Frankfurter Book Messe this year and do a ton more interviews to play over the holiday hiatus for Book Banter with Dianne Burkhart, the podcast, and bring you all of this great information from the world's largest publishing convention. We also plan to have a big feature in the magazine covering the authors and industry professionals that we speak with at the convention. And of course, all of the fantastic authors that we speak to all year long. You will not want to miss this, because if you love books like we do, you do not want to miss a single episode of this podcast or our Book Banter magazine. So now you know what time it is, folks. It's time for y'all to go forth, and hopefully you have some spring weather heading your way and be really happy about it.